Good day. Abosede Ebabhi is my name, your course facilitator for BTN 303, which is course titled Mycology 1. Previously in this class, we took a look at the introduction to this group of organisms known as fungi, where we defined fungi as non-chlorophyllous eukaryotic organisms that have thallus. In today's class, we want to look at the fungal morphology. The thallus, which is the body of a filamentous fungus, is made up of a network of fine thread-like structure collectively known as hyphae. This hyphae can be found growing on suitable substratum or in the substratum as the needs of the fungus appears. At the end of today's class, you should be able to describe the vegetative phase of a fungus, describe the reproductive structure of a fungus, list and describe the various types of sporangium you find in fungi. The vegetative phase of a fungus. The thallus is the vegetative phase of a fungus. The thallus is not differentiated into the leaf, the stem and the root as you have in the typical autotrophic plant. The thallus may be unicellular or filamentous in nature. When the thallus is filamentous, it can be septate, that is, being divided into segments. And when it is non-septate, it has no differentiated compartment. Fungi can be unicellular or multicellular in nature. What you have here on the screen are examples of different types of thallus as you find in the kingdom fungi. The unicellular thallus can be of two forms. It can be in the yeast form or in the yeast-like form for the yeast-like fungi. The yeast is more or less a spherical, single-celled structure that becomes reproductive in nature as the organism matures. It can reproduce both asexually and sexually by either budding or fission. The mycelium is typically absent in this type of thallus. In the lower fungi group, a fungus with this type of thallus is said to be hollow. Examples include cytoplasm and the yeast. For the yeast-like fungus, it usually produces pseudo-hyphae when the environmental or nutritional condition is not conducive for such organism. Example is the yeast called candida that you find growing in the reproductive tract of some human. What you have here on the screen is an example of the typical yeast cell. You can see that this cell is budding. It has produced some daughter cells which grows to maturity, then divides. While to your right you have the holocarpic thallus that does not differentiate itself from the vegetative or the reproductive phase of such a fungus that has this type of thallus. Then we have the filamentous thallus. The fungus with the filamentous thallus is usually called a mould. For some texts, you see them calling all kind of fungi a mould. That definition is quite wrong. It is only the filamentous fungi that are called the mould. And the filamentous thallus can be in two forms. It can be purely filamentous, that's entirely filamentous, or dimorphic. An organism is said to be dimorphic when such an organism exists as two different forms in two different environments. For such an organism, it can grow as yeast in a particular environment and grow as a filamentous fungus in another environment. The filament is a long strand of cells joined head to head, which usually originates from the germination of spores. In some species, after germination, the spores produce a short tubular structure of limited growth called hyphae. Collectively, the hyphae, as said earlier on, is known as the mycelium, which consists of a thin, transparent wall filled with cytoplasmic content. Reproductive phase of the fungi. The reproductive phase of the fungi can be in three different forms. It can be vegetative, it can be asexual, it can be sexual. When it is vegetative, such a fungus is capable of self-reproduction. That means it can break into fragments, it can bud, may also divide by fusion to reproduce itself. It can also come as a sexual form of reproduction, where such a fungus has just one gamete. In this, there is no genetic recombination taking place. It's just the mother cell developing into maturity and producing the daughter cells. While for the sexual form of reproduction, it requires two distinct types of gametes coming together to copulate or fertilize to produce the next generation. And the various forms of reproduction varies from one group of fungi to the other. Another structure we look at in the fungal morphology is the mycelium. As said earlier on, the mycelium can be septate or non-septate. It may be uninucleate or multinucleate. For example, on the screen you have a septate mycelium where the structure is being divided into different segments, septum. And in this kind of mycelium, the septum usually have central pores to allow for continuous movement of the cytoplasmic content around the body of such a fungus. In the other type, which is the non-septate type of mycelium, there is no septum dividing the compartment. So in this, there is a continuous mass movement of the protoplasm of such a fungus. Now we'll take a look at the sporangium. The sporangium is usually likened to a cover crop. It usually houses the spores of the fungus that produces this type of structure. The sporangium usually comes in various forms and colors, and there are different types. So we'll take a look at some of the type of sporangium that we have. What you have on your screen is an empty sporangium. It has let out its own spores, and you can see it like an open cup that the cover have been removed. For the type of sporangium, we have the simple multisporous sporangium, which is a sporangium that usually produces its sporangium on a stipe. You call the stipe the sporangiophore. It brings all the cytoplasmic content from the stipe up to the level where it produces the sporangium, and which eventually develops the spores. For some species of the fungi that produce this type of sporangium, they usually have a special filament that is called the capillitors, which protects the spores from adverse environmental conditions. Another type of sporangium that is present in this group of organisms, that's the fungi, is the simple monosporous sporangium. In this, the sporangiophore comes out at interval from the substratum and gives rise to sporangium forming at the tip of this sporangiophore, that's such as you have on the screen. Then the other type is the plasmodial cap. The plasmodial cap usually develops around developed veins of the fungus that produces this type of sporangium. Just as you have on the screen, you see the plasmodial cap being produced inside the vein, and it is inside this structure that you have the spores developing. Usually the body of the plasmodial cap is covered by a structure known as the peridium. Lastly, we have the itilium. The itilium is usually known as a compound sporangium because it aggregates all the mass, the cytoplasmic content of such a fungus and produce a large sessile itilium. This itilium can be spherical or hemispherical in nature. Thank you for your attention. At the end of this class, you have been able to learn that the body of fungus is usually known as a thallus, which is a network of fine thread-like structure, that is the hyphae. Collectively, you call the hyphae the mycelium. The fungus can exist in two forms. It can be unicellular or multicellular, and these forms can also be the unicellular fungus or the filamentous fungus. And every lower group of fungi have the fruiting structure known as the sporangium that houses the spores, and this sporangium comes in different forms and colors depending on the group of fungi that forms such a sporangium. Thank you.